So welcome to the next video on the paper 3, Weimar and Nazi Germany. This is looking at key topic 3, which is Nazi control and the dictatorship. So this is mainly looking at the first year of the Nazi dictatorship, how it's formed and how it manifests itself as well. So in the previous video, we discussed how the Nazis went from being a kind of fragment party. They only received 2.6% of the vote in 1928, despite all of that tireless campaigning. Hitler had announced that they were going to get power legally and that they were going to get voted as well. But because of the golden years, because of the economic recovery during the Weimar Republic, because of the work of Stresemann and others, people were not interested in voting for National Socialism. But that all changes in 1929, the Wall Street crash and the ensuing Great Depression that led to around 6.1 to 8 million Germans unemployed by 1932 as well. So the political system of Weimar collapses. The issues of presidential power with Article 48 mean that parliamentary democracy starts to decline and we see more authoritarian rule as well. We know that through a series of chancellors, the democracy is weakened even further. And in the end, von Papen does a deal with Hitler in order to get into power. He convinces Hindenburg, as long as von Papen is his vice chancellor, and Hitler will be appointed chancellor with the desire that they will be able to control him. Now, at first they can. In the first cabinet of the new government with Hitler as chancellor, there are 12 in the cabinet, so this is like the inner circle of government. Only 3 of them were Nazis, and one of those is Hitler as well. So Hitler automatically calls for an election that will take place in March. He wants to increase his seats again. You might remember in November of 1932, von Papen, in an attempt to reduce the Nazi vote, held another election and their seats went down from 230 to 196. So Hitler wanted to get the Reichstag seats back up so he had more control over the Reichstag at this point. But on the 27th of February 1933, a miraculous event takes place which Hitler and the Nazis will use to their advantage, and that is the Reichstag Fire. So the Reichstag was the parliament building in Berlin. It's where the government met, it's where the parliament met. And on the 27th of February 1933, it sets on fire. Now, a Dutch communist admits to setting fire, Van der Lubbe, but what he does also say is he acted alone. He had no help from anyone else. But this is the perfect thing for Hitler to use. He can use this to make it seem as if there is a communist plot against Germany. As a result of that, the very next day, he persuades President Hindenburg to sign an emergency decree. That's what the president is there for. And it's called a decree for the protection of the people and state. And with this decree, freedom of speech, free press, and the freedom of assembly, so the freedom of gathering, are all banned. 4,000 leading communists were also arrested and sent to concentration camps. So Hitler is able to persuade Hindenburg to pass this because Hindenburg himself fears communism, and many German people, many German middle class and many German elite and industrialists, big businessmen, they also feared communism. So it works perfectly. So whilst the Nazis didn't start the fire, they used deception, manipulation and propaganda to start to increase their control and create this dictatorship. Now those March elections then come along and the Nazis are able to poll 45% of the vote. All the communists were banned from taking their seats and he's able to do that because of the Reichstag Fire as well. The Centre Party, the Catholic Centre Party, also do really well, as they usually do. Hitler will eventually do a deal with them, but ultimately he now has a fully Nazi government in power. But what he doesn't have yet is those dictatorial powers. That still belongs to Hindenburg. But because he's got increased support, and because he does a deal with the Catholic Centre Party, on the 23rd of March 1933, Hitler is able to pass what's called the enabling law. Now, this gave Hitler the power to make laws without the Reichstag for a period of 4 years. So, in effect, this would make Hitler dictator, all but in name. So he still would technically be the Chancellor of Germany, but really, with the Enabling Act, he is dictator. The law passes, 441 votes vote yes, against 84. So with this, the Reichstag essentially voted itself out of existence. But it's worth noting that this law was passed in the Opera House because the Reichstag building had set on fire, and SA troops lined the outside of the building as well. So there was voter intimidation, which was also used during that March election as well. So once Hitler has those emergency powers, he's able to then create the dictatorship. So remember, he's appointed Chancellor on the 30th of January 1933. By the end of the month in February, the Reichstag Fire has taken place. By mid to late March, the Enabling Act has been passed. So in little than 2 months, he is essentially dictator. And what he's going to start to do is dismantle the democratic features of the Weimar Constitution and the Republic as well. So he's already dismantled civil liberties like free speech. He's now going to start to ban other features as well. So from March through to June, he bans all of the other political parties. And there is a law that is passed, which is the law against the establishment of parties, banning all of those opponents. So the Centre Party are the final party to step down, but the German Democratic Party, the Communist Party, and the SPD are all banned. Furthermore, he also bans trade unions. So on the 2nd of May, after a National Day of Labour, a bank holiday, Hitler showed that he might be working with the unions, but really it was deception. And the next day, all the offices of the trade unions are raided, and all the leaders are banned and sent to concentration camps. Many of them would die in those camps, and trade unions were banned. So he dismantled the workers' rights to protest, the workers' rights to strike as well, were all banned there too. So by 1934, Hitler has complete control over the government. In August of 1934, Hindenburg will die of natural causes, and through a referendum vote, Hitler will ask the German people whether they want him to become the Führer. So putting together the offices of Chancellor and President to become Führer. And that happens in August of 1934. But before that, in June, we have his use of violence, because Hitler has used legality, he's used the law, he's used propaganda, he's used deception and manipulation, and then he's also going to use violence. By June 1934, Hitler is becoming increasingly paranoid about the power of the SA, the brown shirts. Remember, the SA were the working class segment of the Nazi Party, and many of them were ex-soldiers, but they were quite unreliable. And by 1934, they'd grown in power to about 3 million, and Ernst Röhm is their leader. Hitler's becoming paranoid about their power. He's also paranoid that Rome is planning what was called a second revolution, the first being the overthrow of the Weimar Republic. And his inner circle, people like Goebbels and Goering, are fueling this paranoia in Hitler. But there's also another significant institution of Germany that Hitler needs the support of, and that is the army. Now, the army obviously were only limited to 100,000 men, but they were extremely effective and professional and battle-hardened. They did not like the SA, they did not like the influence that they had, and Hitler, to get the support of the army and to get the support of the leading elites in the country, the big conservative business people, he needed to remove the SA. So on the 30th of June 1934, he makes the decision to purge the leadership of the SA. And it's referred to as Operation Hummingbird, that's what the Nazis call it, but it's nicknamed the Night of the Long Knives. And hundreds are murdered on a night of violence. Amongst those is Ernst Röhm. He is gunned down in a prison cell, he's killed. Von Schleicher, the former Chancellor, is gunned down alongside his wife. Gregor Strasser is also killed. And von Pappen's house is surrounded and the telephone lines cut off. He did not have Hitler screaming and squeaking in a corner after all as well. So this kind of meant that Hitler's power was finally consolidated by this time, and especially once he becomes Führer too. Now, from 1933 onwards, then we also see the creation of the terror state. And Nazi Germany will be run like a police state. Hitler will give unprecedented powers to the man in the top right corner there, which is Heinrich Himmler, and the individual in the bottom right, who's called Reinhard Heydrich. And these two individuals will essentially be in charge of the SS. And we know that this was Hitler's personal bodyguard, formed in 1925. They were radical, they were extreme Nazis, they had the ideological beliefs of the Nazis, and they were indoctrinated from quite a young age as well. They become extremely loyal to Hitler, but during the mid-1930s, their numbers expand to around 240,000. They're famous for their black uniforms as well, and they are essentially, most importantly, above the law. So they can do whatever they want. Now, what they do with the SS is they split it into subsections. So you had the SS taking control of concentration camps, and we've already kind of mentioned them. So from 1933, the first men's camp at Dachau is opened, and in Moorrigan, the first women's camp is built, and we see other camps built outside of cities, such as Sachsenhausen, outside of Berlin as well. And this is where they would send undesirables, so prostitutes, people who were gay, minorities, political prisoners, people who they called asocial, like alcoholics, or people who were homeless. All these people are sent to camps. So it's a social cleansing, and the SS are in charge of these camps. The Gestapo were the secret police that were formed also through the SS, and Hermann Goering originally is in charge of the SS, but he relinquishes power to Himmler. They only had around 30,000 officers, but they were in civilian clothing, they were hard to spot, and they relied heavily on informers. 80% of all Gestapo investigations are from informants. And it's this idea of paranoia and fear, denunciating your neighbor just so you're not questioned by the SS. And towards the end of the 1930s, so many people are denunciating their neighbors that Himmler had to order a decree that stated if your denunciation of a neighbor was deemed to be false, you were just simply trying to get one over your neighbor, you would be liable to be sent to a concentration camp. It just shows you how many people were actually reporting to the Gestapo. And the final feature of the SS network is the SD. This is the security force. So this is essentially the Secret Service. And this is led by Heydrich in the bottom right there. They had lots of card index, and this was used to spy on opponents as well and monitor their activity to make sure that no one was being critical of the regime. So a really powerful network that was used to create terror and fear in Nazi Germany. Now, alongside controlling the police state, Nazis also take control of the legal system. Now, the judiciary, as we mentioned before, were already quite conservative and right-wing anyway, so they didn't take much convincing. But what the Nazis do is, as they always do, they use the law, and they use something called Gleichschaltung, which translates to coordinating. And this is something that they do very successfully, is they coordinate different institutions and Nazify them. So all the judges who were deemed to be unsupportive of the Nazi regime were removed, and obviously Hitler has the power to do this because he is Führer. All judges had to become members of the National Socialist League for the Maintenance of Law. So again, they had to practice Nazi law and deliver the law in which the way the Nazis saw them. Lawyers all had to swear that they were going to strive for justice for the will of the Führer and the will of Hitler. From 1936, all judges had to wear the swastika and Nazi eagle on their robes. And you can see a few images, and here is a courtroom. You can see the Nazi flag. You can see the eagle on the judge's clothing. You can see a bust of Hitler in the background as well. But in 1934, a brand new court is set up, and it's called the People's Court, that was set to try people for treason. So people were sent to the People's Court, and this is where, so treason was if you were openly going against the government, and you were often found guilty. Sometimes Hitler would step into the People's Court if he thought sentencing was too lenient, and many people were executed. Thousands of people were executed as a result of the People's Court as well. Alongside the legal system, the Nazis also attempt to control the church. Now, the issue with this was that the Catholic Church were extremely influential in Germany. As we know, around 60% of people were Catholic in Germany, with the other 40% being Protestant as well. And the Centre Party, the Catholic Centre Party, were a really significant political party in Germany, and they had a lot of influence. So Hitler tread carefully with the church because he knew that they were too powerful an institution to take on. But there were a couple of things that he did do. He signed the Concordant Agreement with the Pope at the time, and the Pope agreed that the Catholic Church would stay out of politics as long as the Nazis would not interfere with the church as well. Now, Hitler doesn't stick completely to Concordant, but he doesn't essentially attempt to completely take on the church. Now, some Catholic schools were banned, some were disrupted, some Catholic youth groups were eventually banned by 1936, but ultimately a lot of Catholic bishops were able to oppose. One Bishop Galen opposed the Nazi regime as well. But one thing they do set up is the Reich Church, the German Christians, and this is set up by Bishop Ludwig Müller. And again, it was an attempt to kind of create a unified Nazi church, but it has mixed success really. And again, most people still are able to be Catholic or Protestant with some opposition. So we mentioned propaganda. Propaganda is a really key feature of the Nazis' use of control. They use censorship and they use propaganda, and we can talk about some of those features as well. They take control of the press and all of the newspapers. They take control of the radio, and they take control of all the cultural elements in Germany as well. And Joseph Goebbels is appointed the Minister of the People's Enlightenment and Propaganda, and it's his job to coordinate, again, that idea of Gleichschaltung, Nazi policies into everyday life. So people are being indoctrinated time and time again through all those things we've already mentioned: radio, sport, newspapers, literature, all of those things as well. Rallies and rituals are used quite a lot by the Nazis as well. So they would always show an overwhelming power, a sense of power and unity. That's why the uniforms are really important. That's why the Nazi regalia, the flags, are really important. Again, giving this sense that Germany is back on its feet after the First World War, after the Great Depression. We are now a strong nation again, and they use that really effectively as well. The Heil Hitler greeting as well, the Nazi salute, military anthems as well, celebrating historic days in the German calendar, Hitler's birthday, the anniversary of the Munich Putsch, the anniversary of his seizure of power, and other kind of key features as well there as well. Now, radio, the Nazis used technology quite a lot as well. So the radio, so in 1932, fewer than 25% of Germans owned a radio. By 1939, 70% owned a radio. And they referred to it as the people's radio or the people's receiver. They made radio very, very, very cheap, so people could hear them, afford them, and they would be able to hear Nazi messages and propaganda. They'd all listen to the Führer speak, or they'd listen to Goebbels speak as well. The Olympic Games as well was obviously a hugely significant event which showed the world that Nazi Germany was back on its feet, and they built a new purpose stadium which was built in the design of the Colosseum from Rome, and again there was lots of Aryan statues, and it kind of showed the strength and power of the Nazi regime. But we get censorship as well, so the Nazis control a lot of the culture, and all of the kind of progress from the Weimar years is taken away. There are book burnings that are common. Certain authors are banned, so socialists, Jews, communist literature, that is all banned. Film is taken over, whilst we saw in the Weimar years some really progressive and futuristic kind of thinking in filmmaking, like Metropolis. A lot of that is banned, and we start to see film that is based on Nazi ideology. So we see lots of films that are depicting Jews as evil. We're seeing films that kind of show that euthanasia, so the killing of disabled people, is okay. We see a lot of that as well. Music also, a lot of that music, like jazz music, is banned. It's seen as being, as the Nazis were called, Negroid music, so from African Americans, and music that Hitler liked and art that Hitler liked were more so introduced. Architecture as well, so the Bauhaus movement is banned, and we see a more kind of brutal kind of architecture that is used that we call neoclassicism. So again, it's meant to be based on that of ancient Roman Greece, but with a more modern kind of twist as well. So the big debate over Nazi Germany often is whether people supported the regime or not. And we can look at stats and statistics that might suggest that people did support them. We can see there in the table on the bottom left that Nazi party membership increased from just under 130,000 in 1930 to 5 million by 1939. But obviously, we have to take that with a pinch of salt. Many people joined the party just out of a unison, really, or they were forced to. It doesn't necessarily tell us that this was consented and this was actually that there was enthusiasm. Same with the Hitler Youth membership as well. By 1939, it's actually compulsory to join the Hitler Youth. So unsurprisingly, we see huge numbers increase there. And also with the plebiscites, or the referendums that are placed as well, these are questions that were given to the German people and whether or not they agreed. And we can see that the results are a resounding yes. 99% for two of those referendums of remilitarizing the Rhineland or supporting the reunion of Germany and Austria as well. Again, lots of the time polling stations had SA troops or SS, the voter intimidation. There's talk of invisible ink being used so they could track what people had voted, or there was only one option as well. One person voted against one of these referendums and they were forced to wear a placard around their neck saying that they were a traitor to the German people. But on foreign policy, the top left there, Germany starts to revise some of the features of the Versailles Treaty. They march into the Rhineland in 1936. They take over Czechoslovakia. They take the Polish corridor in 1939, and there's the union with Austria. So no doubt people would have supported these gains because of the humiliation of Versailles as well. But then the other top right photo here as well, image, is the KDF campaign, Strength Through Joy, and this is where lots of people were given free cinema tickets, theatre tickets. They were meant to give free holidays. People were meant to get the Volkswagen, so the people's car that's designed in this time period, but many people never actually got this in the end, so it's quite superficial. 8 to 10 million people by 1938 had benefited in some sense from the KDF. But again, the holidays that were kind of advertised and the cars never actually came to fruition. A lot of the things that people got were kind of free theatre tickets. There is opposition to the regime. So despite the SS and the police state and all the dictatorial powers, there is still opposition. And the main form of opposition we get is from young people and from the church. And we've already talked about the opposition from the church as well. But two of the key features of opposition is the top right there. You've got the Edelweiss pirates. So these were working class young people. They were local groups. It's impossible to say how many were actually involved. So it's hard to quantify the number. But what they did do is they rejected Nazi ideology. They rejected the racism of Nazi ideology. They rejected joining things like the Hitler Youth or the German League of Maidens. And they decided instead that they wanted to hang out with their friends, grow their hair long, smoke, drink, do what teenagers do as well. They're active from the late 1930s. The Nazis don't really respond to them until later in the war when they start to crack down, and a few of them are hanged for treason in the end. And then on the left-hand side, you have the swing youth as well. So these were, again, young people from more upper-class backgrounds who really enjoyed jazz music, which was really popular in the 20s and 30s. So they would like to go out dancing, drinking, listening to jazz, which was banned. Women liked to wear trousers as well, which obviously was against Nazi norms as well. And again, the Gestapo kind of kept tabs on them, but sometimes clubs were raided, but they weren't really a significant threat. The church, as we said earlier, is more significant. More people were obviously belonged to the Catholic and Protestant church as well, and they obviously speak out quite a lot of the time as well. So whilst we do see some church leaders being sent to concentration camps, most significantly Pastor Niemöller, who was a Protestant minister, again, we generally don't see that much opposition from the Nazis there. And obviously there was still opposition from the Communist Party and those who used to be socialists, and there is some, later on in 1938, there's some opposition from the army as well. Okay, that's the end of the key topic. So that's all looking at key topic 3, which is the Nazi control and Nazi dictatorship. The next video will look at life in Nazi Germany, which will look at the life of women, children, and minorities.